Hello, this is Astrology Hotline. I'm Kyle Pierce, and joining me today is the world famous Tristan Paylor. Thanks for joining me today,
everyone.
Tristan.
Thanks for having me.
Always a pleasure. How are things for you these days, Tristan?
Things are good. Things are warming up where I live a little bit. We had a pretty intense deep freeze a couple weeks ago, and now it's really making me rethink the sun in Aquarius, just seeing how much more dominant the sun has become ever since entering Aquarius, that
Mm-hmm.
things are warming up, the blue sky is visible, daylight is longer than it was. Even though it's still cold and there's still snow on the ground, I feel that sort of springtime vibe.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying the sun in Aquarius.
Yeah, I was thinking about that actually because right now, what's today? February 8th. The sun is approaching the Cazimi with Saturn in Aquarius. And I remember was it like a last week, like about when that was starting, about when Saturn was like going under the beams of the sun. It got really, really fucking cold.
Mhm.
Like in Michigan. You're in Ontario, so not too far away. And I was like, oh
Yeah, I
yeah,
think we got the same
freeze.
cold snap.
Yeah, it's like Saturn, receiving the sun in a sense and like wagging the finger at the sun. You're too warm. But then it got like super springy, which made me think about it from a different angle and the idea of like it like makes me nervous because like I saw like squirrels coming out and like birds chirping, and I was like, these poor animals are like gonna have to try to go back into hibernation and they're probably gonna die. Uh,
Oh,
and it's like making me like bringing up fears of like global warming. Um,
yeah.
and yeah, dystopian futures sort of coming to consciousness, which seems very Aquarian, unfortunately, the dark side of Aquarius.
It's very appropriate.
Yeah, but on that delightful note, uh, do we want to jump into our topic today? Our question for the day?
Absolutely. I'm very excited for this question.
Yeah. Yes. So our question comes from Lily, and Lily asks, "What's the difference between a dominant planet and a chart ruler? My chart ruler is the moon, but my dominant planet would also be the moon, question mark, or Venus because it's right on my ascendant, question mark." Uh yeah, so this question brings up a lot. And maybe the first thing I thought of, I guess, when looking at the question is what it is we're talking about when we're talking about a chart ruler and a dominant planet, because especially the further you look into those ideas and concepts in astrology, you don't really get a single definition for either. Yeah, so I guess in order to answer that question, we should probably dive into what that means, like what it is we're talking about. So in modern astrology, most of the time when people are talking about the chart ruler or the ruler of the chart, they're usually referring to the planet that rules the ascendant or the first house, right? So I assume that that's what people are referring to, and I'm usually correct. Did you say the same thing, Tristan?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
99.999% of the time, if somebody refers to a chart ruler or a ruling planet, they're referring to the ruler of the ascendant.
Yes. Um, and then usually the idea of a dominant planet, which I remember looking into quite a bit when I was first getting into astrology. I would see different kind of versions of it. And it seems to be, it's not quite as well defined, I would say. It's sort of a catch-all term for like various methods which attempt to define the planets uh, as one holding more influence in the chart than others, the one with like the most kind of power or juice. Uh, and those methods will include, different combinations and with various like different weightings assigned to factors such as like the number of aspects with other planets, the essential dignity of a planet, the angularity of the planet, accidental dignity according to natural house placement. The idea, natural house placement being a reference to the 12-letter alphabet, the idea of like Mars ruling the first house because, the natural first house is Aries, just kind of a more of a modern idea. I've also seen versions of it that incorporate accidental dignity, the house placement of a planet according to more like traditional strength. You get dispositorship, the final dispositor of the chart will get extra strength. The number of planets occupying signs ruled by a given planet. So if a planet rules a bunch of other planets in the chart, that planet gets extra juice. And then rulership of the signs occupied by the sun, the moon, ascendant, and or midheaven seems to be a popular one. I don't know if you've seen any others, like other approaches to it in most modern contexts. Tristan?
Yeah, dominant planet, I mean, even ruling planet, they're both interesting because they're not really technical terms. I think catch-all is a good way of describing it because there will be techniques, both modern and traditional, from different schools of astrology that are meant to tell you, what planet has the most overall influence or overall strength or will just be a major area of focus. And each of those techniques, there's a technical term for it. Like final dispositor was one you brought up, where I think that's a modern one because I was introduced to the concept of final dispositors in Alan Oken's book, Rulers of the Horoscope, which is from 2000. And he's a modern astrologer. So, his definition of final dispositor, if you have a chart in which there's no mutual reception and where there's one planet in the sign of its rulership, that planet is the final dispositor because it's sort of like every planet rules a sign and every planet's in a sign. So every planet is ruled by another planet, or in Oken's terms, disposited by it. So the moon in Aries would be disposited by Mars because Mars rules Aries. And you can kind of find a chain of rulership. And so if you have a situation in your chart where, say, you've got, one planet in the sign of its rulership, like, say, Saturn and Capricorn, then all those chains of rulership are always going to lead to Saturn and Capricorn. That's going to be the end point. And so according to that line of thinking, if there's a final dispositor in a chart, because all roads of rulership ultimately terminate at that planet, then that planet's kind of driving the bus. They have a lot of power.
Yeah.
But that's like dispositor, that's a specific term for a specific technique, whereas dominant or ruling planet could refer to any number of those techniques.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the dispositorship specifically, I think that idea tends to be really used a lot in like Vedic astrology. Like I don't hear that idea as much in traditional Western texts. But that's, I guess, the thing is that a lot of the ideas around like the dominant planet in the way it's kind of used in modern astrology, it's a bit like there's like a potluck or like a buffet of different techniques that are sort of used to define planetary strength. And different astrologers, different people will tend to sort of like pick and choose, like add different techniques to their plate and decide, which they think is, the most important and relevant, which especially as maybe we get into some of the, it's certainly not a new idea that, that there is a sort of dominant planet or a planet that, takes precedence over all other planets. And there's been a lot of different approaches to determining what that planet is. And there's also like different definitions of what that means, I guess. So like, I guess maybe the deeper question is like, what does it mean to, be dominant in a life or in any context? It does indicate that like a planet has sort of supremacy, sort of top tier power. But like over the entirety of your life or over different segments of your life. It's like sort of different ways of organizing that and defining that sort of hierarchy, I suppose,
Hmm.
which we'll talk about a bit. The more I looked into all the different techniques and approaches to it, the more it made sense to me that that is kind of what we're doing, the sort of like potluck style approach to it. I don't think there's anything wrong with like sort of a make your own approach to defining a dominant planet, like getting a sense of like how that approach was used in the past and what the justifications were for
Hmm.
giving a planet more influence, and even like what techniques, like what it was that they were trying to determine specifically by using that technique, because
Hmm.
sometimes it's a little more well defined than other times.
Yeah.
Feel like this ends up being the answer to every question that we do on this podcast. Is that uh, there is no like one answer
Nope.
to anything with astrology, unfortunately. But I think the more you understand the system and the more you understand the way it's been used in the past, the better you can. If you're gonna create your own plate from the buffet, you can create a better meal for yourself, perhaps by knowing, the ingredients or something.
Hmm. Yeah, I guess to use a term like ruling or dominant planet, you could be using any number of techniques. But if you say the master of the nativity or the Almuten Figuris or the final dispositor, which are techniques we'll briefly cover, then you're speaking about like it's a very technical term. There's an exact definition of what that is. So if you say to somebody, this planet is the ruler of your ascendant, or this planet is the final dispositor of your chart, there's an exact definition of what that means.
Yeah,
Whereas ruling planet or dominant planet, there isn't an exact definition. There are various ways of sort of defining and determining what that planet would be.
yeah, yeah. So maybe we can jump into um, maybe some of the earliest techniques that approach this idea of a dominant planet or a
Yeah,
master of the chart, if you will, a one planet to rule them all. Uh,
I do want to say, the definition that most people use of ruling planet is the ruler of the ascendant,
mhm.
and although that wouldn't have been called the ruler of the entire chart in ancient astrology, there is a strong precedence for giving priority to that planet as far back as Hellenistic astrology.
Yeah.
Vedius Valens gives a lot of precedence to the planet ruling the ascendant and says if you're delineating a chart, it's one of the first things you should look at.
Hmm.
Um, and the way I was taught to use it in Chris Brennan's course is that the ruler of your ascendant, that planet and its placement by sign and house is going to indicate sort of the overall direction your life is going to head in.
Hmm.
Um, the first house, the ancient term for it was the helm, which is like the part of the ship you steer from. So presumably the planet that rules the first house, the planet that rules the helm, is the one who's steering the ship. So they're kind of giving it direction. So
Yeah.
there is definitely like going all the way back to Hellenistic astrology, there is sort of like a rationale for why you might want to call that a ruling planet or the ruling planet of a chart. It's very important.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm glad you
And
brought
it's
up
been
the.
like important through like I feel like it's one of those things that's universal that like I don't think there's a school of astrology where that isn't really important, where that planet isn't considered really important and sort of given a lot of focus, especially when you're just starting to look at a chart.
Yeah. I mean, and for good reason. And I'm glad you brought up that idea of like the helm of the ship and like who's steering it, because that was kind of at the center. That concept or metaphor was kind of at the center of um, what at least I can identify to be the earliest sort of incarnation of this idea of like a dominant planet or ruler of the chart, master of the chart, which I think would be probably Ptolemy. When was Ptolemy around? First century, second century
Yeah.
AD? That sounds about right. Um, or CE, rather. But So Ptolemy presented the idea of gonna struggle to pronounce this one. Prorogator.
Prorogator?
Yeah, which I'm not going to use that word.
Prorogator?
I
Yeah,
think
it's a tongue
predominator.
twister.
Yeah,
Predominator sounds cooler also.
predominator. Yeah, the predominant planet.
Rule
Yeah.
of cool,
Hmm.
I
Yeah,
think,
yeah,
uh, should be used to determine the name.
yeah. So you basically had this idea of a ship, right? That was very popular in Hellenistic astrology. This metaphor, this nautical metaphor, um, and you basically had different roles on the ship. You had planets sort of being assigned different roles in steering the ship. Uh, and the predominator, we'll call it, according to Ptolemy, was defined by either the sun or moon, if it was in the first, 11th, 10th, ninth, or seventh house. But if neither of them were to qualify, were to meet either of those conditions, any of those conditions, then the planet with the most dignity or rulership in the degrees of the sun, moon, ascendant, and lot of fortune were considered. Did Ptolemy also consider the prenatal lunation or no?
I am not sure.
I don't think Ptolemy. I could be wrong, but yeah, and essentially the sort of Ptolemaic approach would be the predominator as kind of the playing the lead role. Uh, and I don't even know if he gave precedence to sect either. Like his, I think, was a little more simple, and it got a little more complex with Porphyry's approach to it, which was
Hmm.
I think maybe a century or so later than Ptolemy, which takes it kicks it up another notch, and is probably resembles more, I guess, some of the later permutations of this, which would be Porphyry would define the predominator as still either the sun or moon. Starting out, you start off with either the sun or the moon. You're looking at both of the luminaries, the sources of light. Uh, and then you want the most angular luminary, sort of the first tier of precedence. Which one is the most angular? And then which one is the most eastern, as in the left side of the chart, basically. Which one is closest to the ascendant? Because the western side would be more associated with other people. It's and the idea of sort of decline going towards the setting sun, uh, while that eastern side, the left side of the chart, is more associated with you and maybe your interests. Um, so that
And
gets a
like
little.
life, like birth and life, where the
Yes,
Western side
yeah,
is more like decline and death,
exactly, yeah,
endings. The left side or the Eastern side is beginnings.
yeah. So you want the light that's pointing more in the direction of life rather than death. You don't want to steer your ship towards death, I guess, being the idea. Um, and basically, you would give preference to the sun in a day chart or the moon in a night chart, uh, but it could be either one, just depending on which one was better suited, which one was more angular. The sun or moon could be disqualified if in a cadent house, if in the third, sixth, ninth, or 12th house, which is kind of interesting because, usually the ninth and to a lesser degree the third are considered to be a little more favorable houses because they
Hmm.
are configured to the ascendant. And yet with this approach, they're not they're not really they're sort of disqualified because I don't know. I guess the idea being that it's they're declining and they're declining away from an angle, so they're busy. My justification in my mind would be like, the ninth house planet being a pilot maybe for a ship is, do you want the philosopher piloting your ship necessarily? Like,
Maybe not.
yeah,
And
I
maybe
don't
you
know.
want the philosopher taking notes in their journal, or,
Hmm.
making observations. You don't
Yeah,
necessarily want them.
be better like quartermaster.
Piloting.
Hmm. But then, yeah, basically, if neither the sun or moon meet the qualifications, if neither the sun or moon are in a uh, angular or succedent house, then it defaults to the ascendant. And not necessarily the ruler of the ascendant, just the ascendant itself as being the predominator.
Interesting.
Yeah. Which I guess when I'm thinking of the predominators, it's more of the idea. I think it helps me to conceptualize it as more of the vessel itself is the thing that is being steered. Because you,
Right, because then it's the ruler of the predominator that
Mhm.
is sort of the master of the ship.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So the sort of first technique that Porphyry presents with this idea of the master of the nativity, basically the one planet to rule them all, would be the planet that rules the predominator. So in that case, if both of your luminaries basically were cadent, if say they were in the ninth and sixth houses respectively, then you would default to the ascendant, in which case then the ruler of your ascendant would be the ruler of your chart in a sense, or the master of your nativity. But then there's also kind of variations on this as well that look at the bound ruler of the predominator as being sort of co-captain.
Right, the co-master.
Yeah.
So if you're so it's the co-ruler of the predominator, or the bound ruler of the predominator is the co-ruler.
Mm-hmm.
So the ruler of the predominator. So say the sun in Taurus is the predominator, then Venus is the master,
Mm-hmm.
but the bound ruler of the degree of Taurus that the sun is in would be the co-master.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So like for me, I believe my sun, I have the sun in Taurus. It's in the 11th house. So that would make the sun the predominator. And it's maybe worth noting is since I have the moon in the fifth house, they would both qualify, right? But because the sun in the 11th would be closer to the ascendant, it would be on the eastern side, on the left side of the chart. That would make the sun the more capable of the two in terms of being the predominator of leading, of being the vessel on which I set forth on the voyage of life, I guess.
And then you've also got a day chart.
Yes.
So Porphyry says give preference to the luminary of the sect. So the sun if it's a day chart and the moon if it's night.
Mm-hmm.
So all in all, very good argument that the sun is predominator.
Yeah. But then so yeah, I also have it in the bound of Mercury, I believe, according to it's a bunch of different approaches to the bounds, but the most popular one being the Egyptian bounds, which will include like a link to maybe an image of the bounds so you can like see where they are because they're kind of crazy, but they're basically little subdivisions of each sign that assign certain rulership to different planets kind of within that sign, little subsets. So that would make what Venus the main master of my nativity, but then Mercury is sort of co-master. Maybe Venus would be the executive
Second
producer.
Command.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
I feel like I should mention, since we're running over a lot of really technical stuff that can be hard to follow, that there will be a link in the show notes for all kinds of resources if you want to figure out how to use these techniques on your own. Then please check the show notes for the link, and there will be information on how to find your predominator and how to find the ruler according to all of these other different techniques we're going to go over.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. What about you? What's your what's your predominator according to this technique?
Mine would also be the sun because I have
Hmm.
using whole signs the sun in the 10th and using, but it's a little towards the east. If you use quadrant houses, it's in the 11th.
Mm.
And I have a day chart. And I've also got the moon in the 5th, like you. So the sun
Yeah.
would be my predominator, and it is ruled by Mars. So the master of my nativity would be Mars. And then the sun is in the bound of Mercury in my chart as well.
Oh,
So
okay.
Mercury would be the co-captain. So
Mm.
I've got Mars with Mercury second in command.
Interesting.
And you've got Venus with Mercury second in command.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think
The
Mercury's a good co-captain. That's kind of Mercury likes, being in a place where like they don't have to make the final
yeah.
decision. They can be more of a counselor or advisor. They bring the messages and the information and resources and give you good advice. But at the end of the day, they have the freedom to just kind of come and go as they please. The
Yeah.
captain is kind of like, you gotta go down with the ship.
While Mars, I can see definitely preferring to take the dominant
Yes.
role. Like
And also being willing to go down with the ship.
yeah, 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 yeah. Uh, do we want to jump into? Wait a second. Yeah, and then I get so part of this technique also included identifying another kind of officer, I guess, on the deck of the ship. Um, the Curios, which this one's a little more like tricky to identify. Uh, it wasn't quite as like well laid out kind of mathematical equation. It almost seems like there's a bunch of different factors you consider, and then you kind of look for the planet that seems to be most suited to this role. And the Curios is kind of likened to the captain of the ship, to the person that steers the ship, or the planet that steers the ship, who takes on the more active hands-on role, while the master of the nativity is, you could say, I guess, the owner of the ship. Um, but the Curios would be the one that's actually doing the job of steering. Uh,
Kind of like having a franchise and there's like the owner of the corporation. There's like, the owner of McDonald's and then there's the franchise owner. If your chart
yeah,
is that particular franchise, like your chart is the McDonald's that's at the corner of, Main Street and whatever street, then
yeah,
the owner of that particular restaurant would be like the Curios, and the owner of McDonald's at large, I don't know. That metaphor is falling apart. I
no, no,
try.
no, no. I think that works. Yeah, I do actually, because it sort of gets the at the There's different levels of investment almost
Yeah.
when I think about this. Is that the captain of a ship is definitely invested, but they're a little more physically invested because like they're probably paid to man the ship, right? But they're a little more physically involved, and like if the ship sinks or the voyage doesn't go well, like they're gonna die. But if the
Yeah.
master, right, the person who owns the ship or the person who's funding the voyage, and sort of setting, the course, setting the reason for the ship to
Right.
go out in the first place, they're going to lose their investment, but they may not necessarily be on the ship itself.
Right. I really like that. That's a good way of putting it. I've been trying to think of like, since I've never spent any time on a ship, I'm trying to think of, metaphors that are a little more applicable to most people's day-to-day lives. And I guess I'm thinking maybe McDonald's is too big of a
Mhm.
corporation, but I used to work for a bakery, and the bakery, it was a franchise that had three locations. So the owner of the company of the three bakeries had a lot of investment
Mhm.
in it. Oh, sorry. Thank you. I've just been brought food.
Oh, nice.
Um, yeah, the owner of the bakery, because there were only three, had a lot of investment in the three and would visit all three locations pretty often, but was not like the floor manager in charge of each location.
Yeah.
You'd see her maybe once a month, and she'd come in and sort of check things out. But if you were on staff, it was the person who was like the regional manager of that location was the boss. That was the person you went to. And that was the person who was going to kind of go down with the ship. You know, if
Yeah.
something went wrong, the owner wasn't going to come in because there was an issue with the plumbing or because somebody's dog got loose in the bakery. The person, you know, who actually like owns that location is going to have to be there, and the floor manager on duty, like they're the people who are going to have to deal with it directly.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I was thinking about like the movie production sort of analogy, which maybe we'll talk about the analogies a little more. Get an idea of like what these things mean, maybe
Yeah.
after we run through the different versions of it, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the Lord of the was also called the Lord of the Nativity, which I kind of distinguished from the Master of the Nativity. Is like, you know, the Master would be like the
Right.
king of the person sitting on the throne of the kingdom, but like the Lord is like the person who oversees the fiefdom in question. We'll say they have their hands kind of like your the franchise owner or
Yeah.
the regional manager. But that was a little more focused on looking for the most capable planet in the chart. Uh, so like
Right.
your master isn't necessarily the most capable planet. It's the planet that rules the predominator, basically, or the planets um, that co-rule the predominator. Uh, but the factors involved, and this is not a full list, but it would include um, occupying the same bounds as the ascendant, which is an interesting one. As
So
sort
the
of bumping
bound
it up.
ruler or term ruler of the ascendant degree.
I guess it would be the way I understand it. Like I think we have the same ascendant. So
Yeah,
we have
we do. Same
it,
bound.
yeah, the ascendant in the bounds of Mars. Um, you would look for another planet that is in a bound of Mars.
Oh, is that? I thought it was just the ruler of that bound. That was my understanding of
It's
it,
the
but
way that
I could be wrong.
yeah, I mean, there's,
I don't use that specific
I
technique
know.
for anything. It's just one of those things that, like, I'm aware of it. I've learned about it before. I never use it in practice.
It was
It's
one
just to
of
be like,
the,
oh, that's a
yeah,
thing.
it was one of the ones I found for the many different ways of calculating the Curios. Uh,
Also, I feel like I should say in the resource list that there will be a link to in the show notes, there
mhm,
is an episode of the Astrology podcast on finding the master of the nativity.
mhm.
And that goes over all the techniques Kyle and I are talking about right now in like extreme detail with tons of example charts. So if you're really curious about
Yeah,
this model of finding a chart ruler in Hellenistic astrology, then definitely check out that lecture that's available for free.
yeah,
You will be able to use the technique after watching the lecture on your own.
yeah, yeah. The goal here is not to go in quite ad nauseum with how to calculate it, but just to give an
Yeah.
overview of the different ideas of how the concept is approached. But so further factors would be like the Lord of the Ascendant would get a bump. Lord of the Moon, the ruling planet of the Moon, the planet that rules the 10th house, uh, the planet that rules the bound that the prenatal lunation occupies. So
Ooh, there's a very
which,
specific one.
yeah, also known as the syzygy, but the basically the last full or new moon before you were born would be where the syzygy is, or the prenatal lunation. So the bound ruler of that one, uh, also the domicile ruler of it, the ruler of the sign of the lot of fortune, um, planets making phasis. So basically being exactly be 15 degrees away from the sun on either side would, if they're about to make a like a helical rise, uh, they're, I guess, a little louder in charts in general, so that like bumps them up as qualifying for captain of the ship. Uh, but in most of these approaches, a planet is disqualified if it's retrograde or under the beams of the sun, so that they would be less fit as captains, I guess, for
Right.
various reasons. But what I find interesting, I guess, about this is the idea that like the planets are competing for the role of captain, So,
They're all handing in their resumes.
yes,
They're all going
exactly.
in for interviews.
Yeah, and maybe the master of nativity decides which one to hire or something,
Hmm.
which may not be the best analogy because I haven't seen anywhere that like there needs to be an aspect between the two, between the Curios and the master of the nativity. Um, but that could tell you something about how the ship is, how the
Right.
voyage
Like, do you
is
have
being run.
yeah, is the master hands off?
Yeah,
Or are they showing up and seeing what's going on all the time?
exactly. Yeah, that's one of the reasons I like the. We'll get into my movie analogy later, but yeah. So there's that. That's a version, I guess, of rulership of a chart.
I think it's also maybe worth pointing out that, we have to use analogies and metaphors to describe things in astrology a lot of the time, but metaphors do fall apart after a point, and
Yeah,
everyone's birth chart is different. So it's not always as simple as we have a really clear cut analogy and really clear cut rules for every planet in your chart.
yeah,
Um, it's probably not going to be that, as much as we try to systematize things in astrology, it's probably not always going to be that clear. Not
hmm,
everyone is going to have a chart where, I mean, and you're also, I mean, you don't have to look at your chart through the lens of hierarchies or power dynamics, but since we're talking about rulers, that's generally, if you're trying to identify sort of a dominant or ruling planet in a chart, you're kind of looking at it through a lens of hierarchy of like somebody's in charge.
yeah,
Um, and if you're looking at a chart through that lens of trying to find, what are the power dynamics and who's in charge, who's got the most responsibility, etc.,
hmm,
it's not always going to be super clear exactly what every planet's role is in that system, exactly where every planet is in that hierarchy,
hmm,
what exactly it means for them to be in that position in the hierarchy, and what exactly, what is their exact job description in that hierarchy. And are they always going to do that exact job? Like, life is a little messy,
oh
so
yeah.
it's
Which I
it's a little
mean,
it's a little tricky to systematically work that out, but it can be helpful to sort of try to apply those systems to the
yeah.
extent that we're able to.
Well, and I guess that's what I like about it too is if you can start with that sort of structure, that idealized structure, and then
Yeah.
maybe consider different factors in the chart and consider how things actually play out. Where
Hmm.
you have a certain job description, but how many people are actually only end up doing the stuff that is described in their job description. Like how many people
Hmm.
often you end up doing other things because you're just better at it
Yeah.
than maybe somebody else, or you're not as good at it, so other people maybe fill in that space to varying degrees, or you just get extra tasks sort of laid on you as required, as necessary.
Yeah. Yeah.
uh
As your role can also shift and change,
mhm.
as things change in your
Yeah,
life.
yeah,
The role of the planets can also shift and change a bit as circumstances in your life change.
yeah, for sure. I mean, so I mean, good. I think you already made the point that yeah, this is a angle on it. And
Hmm.
we'll get more, I guess, into how they're used. But you get this sort of ancient Hellenistic distinction, and there are different ideas on it. Even Firmicus Maternus um, was a little vague, almost like he was kind of like, well, here's a bunch of different ways that this is said to be the case. Read a little quote: is some have said that the ruler of the chart is the planet which is located in favorable houses of the chart, in his own house or his own terms. But others have figured from the sun and moon, arguing that the ruler of the chart is the one in whose terms the sun and moon are found. That is, the sun in the daytime and the moon at night. Uh, Terms would also be balanced; they're used interchangeably. Um, but there is some point to this theory. Others say that the ruler of the chart is the ruler of the exaltation of the moon. Still others maintain that the ruler is the one whose sign the moon enters after she has left the one in which she is found at the birth. Which I thought that was
Interesting.
interesting. Yeah,
That's very interesting.
yeah.
It's so funny. I mean, you see this a lot in ancient astrology where um, astrologers are vague about their sources sometimes.
Mhm.
Like who are some? Firmicus? Who are you referring to? He's just like some people say this
People
and
say
some
this.
people say that.
Yeah,
I don't know
isn't
who
that how it
said
is now?
it.
I mean, and it. I mean, it makes sense because you know that there were other astrologers and probably other written texts available at the time
Hmm.
that Firmicus was writing this in what, the third century,
Yeah.
fourth century. But we don't have access to those. Like those are
Yeah.
gone. They got burned, during a war of some kind or something. Uh,
It's funny. It's kind of a lot of these authors are kind of doing what we're doing here, where we're just sort of
yeah,
like the librarian. Like, here are a bunch of resources. Here's what a bunch of different astrologers throughout history
yeah,
have said the ruling planet is. And that's kind of what Firmicus is doing. He's like, well, I've read a bunch of astrologers, and this person says this is the ruling planet, and this person says you use this to find the ruling planet. We're doing the same thing.
yeah, exactly. Which, yeah, which I think, I mean, I always appreciate it when I read that, where I'm like, okay, here's like all the different ideas about it, and then you know, there's an implication that like here's the different ideas, and if you understand the thought process behind it, you can maybe come to your own conclusion to some degree.
Right. Yeah, I like that too. Is I've my experience with these techniques has very much been um, trying to apply the technique and exploring it is an act of meditation upon my chart in and of itself.
Mm-hmm.
And I get to know my chart a little bit more intimately when I try to apply these techniques to it. And then, I get a deeper understanding of what is the rationale? Like, why did this astrologer think that this was the best technique? Why
Mm-hmm.
did this astrologer think that, like, a really simple example with the master of the nativity from Hellenistic astrology that starts with you find the predominator, and then the ruler of the predominator is the master. And the predominator is usually the sun or the moon. And there's a rationale behind that because the sun and the moon are the sources of light, they're the sources of power. So if you're looking for a ruler, then they must get their power from the source of power in the system.
Yeah.
So there's a sort of rationale, and it's like once you've played around with the technique and learned about it, and you start to understand the underlying rationale, then you can also maybe experiment and go, I understand the sort of reasoning behind why you would look at this part of the chart to try and determine power. Are there other ways that reasoning can be applied?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. And I guess I mean, it's maybe worth addressing that different astrologers during the Hellenistic period applied these concepts to often very specific techniques. Like I believe, um, I think Ptolemy used the predominator basically as an indicator of like physical health. Um, a lot of this was used to calculate length of life. Oh, which I don't want to dive into, but it's
No, it's creepy. But
yeah, it is creepy.
there's
But
like um I feel like an interesting point of synthesis with a lot of these techniques. I know that we're probably going to discuss the Almuten Figuris as well, which is another one with the Predominator, with the Master of the Nativity, with the Almuten Figuris, which we'll get into, with the Ruler of the Ascendant. All of the factors that are used to determine rulership using all of those techniques, they really come back to what in astrology gives life, what grants life.
mhm.
Um, the first house represents your birth. It represents the meeting of your body and mind and soul. It's sort of like the totality of your life. And so the ruler of your ascendant is sort of like a life-giving point. And
Yeah,
the luminaries, because they give off light and power in the system of astrology, they're life-giving. when you look at when we get into the positions that are used to calculate the Almuten Figuris, all of those positions, like it uses the sun, the moon, the ascendant, they're all positions that are in some way related to giving like life or power to the
Yes.
chart. So I think that's like no matter what technique you're using, I feel like there is that common ground, that sort of the rationale sort of underlying all of them, that they all share in common, even though they're all so different, is that you're trying to determine what is this chart plugged into that's giving it juice
Yeah.
to sort of empower it, to give it life, to make it actionable.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's where I guess it gets kind of interesting is you get sort of different definitions later on as we move into like maybe more medieval era. Well, not necessarily different. I mean, they're different than like maybe the modern perspective to some degree. Or as we move through time, different ideas about where the source of life, if you will, is coming from in the chart.
Mm,
And but that being basically the basis for like who controls the life-giving points, or the most life-giving juice, if you will, who's got
yeah,
their finger on their hand on the lever of the flow of
yeah,
life force, and
yeah,
that being sort of who you want to look at. But even during the Hellenistic era, like Ptolemy seems to take a much more like physical approach to this, to these techniques, where it's like, you know, if a malefic hits your predominator, life force under attack, an end of life at some point.
right.
If it gets beat up enough. Um, well, while you get others who are more focused on looking at these points as kind of defining personality, to some degree, or character, or like spiritual
Right.
concept, the intent of the soul.
Yeah, where like the sort of ruling planet is not just the one that gives life, but is also one that bestows character and gives
Hmm.
direction, a sense of purpose or destiny.
Yeah.
Which I think, and that comes from very early on in the tradition. Like I think Porphyry, Chris goes over this in the astrology podcast episode on Master of the Nativity in great detail, but um, I think Porphyry used the Master of the Nativity in connection with the ancient Greek concept of the guardian daimon,
Hmm.
which is a daimon is sort of like the loose translation into English would be spirit. Um, Although obviously there's a lot of cultural context that gets lost when you say spirit, but that's sort of the closest translation that we have, is that it's a spirit. And so they're like a spirit who acts as a guiding force in your life.
Hmm.
They can be a protector, a guardian, but they're also sort of like their job is to keep you on task in terms of fulfilling your destiny,
Yeah.
sort of the spiritual reason that you are alive here on Earth.
Hmm.
They're
Yeah.
keeping you on course.
Yeah, and I think that that idea gets a little more rooted in the Almuten of the figure, which I
Mm-hmm.
think is a concept that evolved out of the medieval era of astrology, that sort of took, it seems to be an evolution of the idea of the master of the nativity from Hellenistic astrology. And I think the most popular calculation for the Almuten of the figure comes from Ibn Ezra.
And this particular calculation, I believe it's Robert Zoller who first associates it with the concept of the guardian daimon
Hmm.
or the concept of the guardian angel, because it's not explicit in Ibn Ezra's text. He gives this formula for calculating a chart ruler of some kind.
Hmm.
And the only sort of example of how he uses it is you can use it to determine like the appearance or the beauty of the owner of that chart. So you can calculate the Almuten Figuris and it will tell you something about how beautiful the person is. But
Hmm.
Zoller thought that there was some subtext going on in Ibn Ezra's book, because astrologers could be very, they would hide a lot of
Yeah.
the sort of more esoteric or like the true meaning of things, they'd sort of conceal it. So,
Yeah.
not
It's very
everyone
privileged
reading,
information.
yes. So not just anybody reading the text fully grasps what it means. I think the Picatrix is kind of famous for being full of these little traps,
Hmm.
where it's not always obvious what the real meaning is in the text. And so Zoller believed that um, the sort of deeper meaning of this calculation was that it was used to help determine the nature of a person's guardian daimon. And Zoller works with guardian angels a lot. He worked with them in his work. And so he worked heavily with this calculation as a way of sort of, if you come from a tradition, whether it's like a Neoplatonic or Hermetic tradition that uses the guardian daimon, or maybe a Christian tradition, like a Catholic tradition that uses a concept of a guardian angel. If you have like some concept that there is a spiritual being who's assigned to you, or that perhaps you've
Hmm.
chosen before birth, and that they kind of keep you on task and give you guidance and protection, that this calculation will help you understand their nature.
Yeah.
And then if you understand their nature, it's easier for you to actually make contact with them.
Yes. Yeah. And yeah, let's go over how the Almuten maybe is calculated real quick, and then
Sure.
we can dive into some of these more interesting concepts, which is really what I wanted to talk about. I think, but
Sorry, I just kind of
no,
went
no,
for it.
no, no, no. I mean, we're both. It's fine. So yeah, with Ibn Ezra, he basically lays out, that there are the five places of life that we kind of referred to before, but you get, the ascendant, the two luminaries, sun and the moon, uh, the lot of fortune, and the basically the prenatal lunation. Um, so if you want to figure out the Almuten, and you can calculate it if you want, if you have a piece of paper, go for it. But start with a list of the seven traditional planets: the Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. And then look at basically the degrees of the Sun, Moon, prenatal lunation, ascendant, and the lot of fortune. And then determine the rulers of the degrees of each. And then you assign points. So the domicile ruler of the sign would get 5 points, the exaltation, 4 points. The triplicity ruler, which is maybe another complicated thing that we won't go too deep into today, but
Yeah,
it's,
there are different
yeah,
different ways of working with
yeah.
this. But
But
I think the one you've got is a good rule of thumb.
yeah, it's just the day ruler by day, or the night ruler by night only. Um, and then, they would get 3 points. The bound ruler would get 2, and then the decan or face ruler would get 1. So yeah, you stack those points up, and then you look at the accidental dignity of each planet. So the first house basically goes in order. So first house gets 12 points, top tier, and then it descends from there to like next most powerful house down to the sixth house, which only gets 1 point, which I thought was interesting because it's almost like a toss up between astrologers whether or not the 12th or the sixth house is the worst house. Um, which it's because it depends on how you look at it, but yeah, it basically goes in order. Starting with the first is the most, and then 10th, 7th, 4th, 11th, 5th, 2nd, 9th, 8th, 3rd, 12th, and 6th, which this is Ibn Ezra's version of it. And you might get different astrologers that will assign different values to different houses. And then you look at the ruler of the day. So if you were born on like a Wednesday, it would be Mercury would be the ruler of the day, and then the ruler of the hour.
That
Yeah,
reminds me, I should put something in the resources. So
yeah.
in the resource page that I have linked in the show notes,
Mhm.
there is a link to this whole formula on Chris Warnock's website. He was a student of Robert Zoller, and he's sort of the foremost astrologer, I think, in the public eye who works with the Almuten Figuris technique today.
Mhm.
So he, all for free, he has all this information on his website. I know it's extremely confusing, so it's good to just be able to look at it.
Yeah.
And the prenatal lunation would probably be a new concept to a lot of people.
Mhm.
There's also a link in that document to a website that calculates the prenatal lunation for you. So you can find that placement on that website. So
Yeah.
all of that will be available at the link in the show notes for you if you're curious about this technique. Also, I am working with this technique a little bit in my own chart and the charts of people I know, and I'm curious about using it more. So feel free to message me on Instagram if you want to know what it is. I will just calculate it for you
Yeah.
and tell you what it is. And if you want to have a little conversation about it, that would be cool. So I am happy to provide that service.
Yeah. Yeah. You can try me too, but you'll probably better luck with Tristan because I'm notoriously bad at it. I'll get to you, but it might take a week or two.
I'm the Aries. I'm a little faster.
Yeah. Uh, yeah. So essentially, the other factors would be just the ruler of the day, which would get 7 points. The ruler of the hour would get another 6 points. And then there's another factor that I don't want to get too into, but basically Ezra gives special power to Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. And the idea being that if the sun is separating from an aspect from Mars, Jupiter, or Saturn, because they're slower moving than the sun, basically if either of those planets are between 15 and 16 degrees, so between not being under the beams of the sun and a sextile, they get 3 points. And then basically the further away they get fewer points until they hit their retrograde. After they hit the retrograde, they don't get any more points. But just this idea that they get special power, and I think it has to do with the idea that during that phase of the cycle, like when, say, Jupiter is emerging from the beams of the sun, it's like a brand new, newborn Jupiter. So like the new moon of Jupiter. And it will be gaining in light as the sun continues to separate. Yeah, it's an interesting idea that I don't see actually being implemented by like Zoller. I don't think really included that one.
No, and he goes over this technique in one of his books on medieval astrology, and he doesn't use that whole
Yeah,
consideration of whether Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn are separating or applying to the sun.
yeah,
He doesn't use that consideration. I don't use it in my calculation either.
me neither. I just thought it was an interesting way to consider the idea of like planetary strength, even like
Yeah,
if that's what we're trying to measure here, like all of the different
yeah,
ways that astrologers add juice.
yeah. The
Uh,
relationship with the sun, I think, is definitely a factor that you can take into consideration.
yeah, um, yeah, and then basically the planet with the most points gets the role of Almuten of the figure, is the victor of the chart, I guess would be the more direct translation, which made me think of the idea of like the one who like collects all the winnings of the chart, I guess. The one who's like
Oh
benefiting in a
yeah.
sense. Uh
Oh, that's funny. That brings new light to Mars being the Almuten Figuris in my charts.
yeah.
He's really just trying to get all the winnings at the end of the day.
Yeah.
He wants the trophy.
Yeah. Which I guess which we'll get into a little more as we go, but this idea of the one that has the most stake in you, in a sense, like the most
Right.
invested in you and the outcome of you.
Right.
Uh,
The outcome of you.
yeah, who who on whose behalf, who's sponsoring you? Uh,
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. Is it's like if you think of your life as being a journey,
mhm.
as some sort of undertaking. I mean, this is a very sort of goal-oriented or purpose-oriented way of looking at your life, which is very Western and is obviously not the only way of looking at life, but
Yeah.
if you're sort of looking at it through that lens of like, oh, my life has sort of a purpose, like I'm here for a reason, and I'm embarking on some kind of a journey. Who is sponsoring you? Who's really invested in you succeeding
Hmm.
on your mission?
Yeah, exactly. And I want to jump into what it means, but just to wrap up this segment, when you get into like the Renaissance era, like William Lilly used a slightly different calculation than Ezra. He replaced basically the prenatal lunation with the midheaven. So
Oh,
just if you
cool.
just substitute it, which probably to like modern sensibilities makes more sense because we don't really talk about the prenatal lunation so much in modern
Yeah,
astrology.
that one's really kind of disappeared from
Yeah,
the tradition. We don't use the prenatal lunation. I had never heard of it until I started looking at this technique. It was brand new to me.
yeah, yeah.
But the midheaven, everyone is familiar with.
Hmm. And then you start getting like other permutations that like rank planets according to other strength points. Like I think in one I found that like Kazemi planets get like 7 points. Um, you start to get more and more variation. Um,
Hmm.
and I think by the time we go into like the sort of dark period where astrology sort of fell out of favor during the scientific and industrial revolution to a large degree, uh, we're sort of trying to it sort of looks like we're trying to reassemble this idea using the bits and pieces that we have available
Hmm.
at the time. And then now as we're getting access to more and more of these ancient texts, uh, we're reintroducing a lot of these techniques, but we're still, I mean, to a large degree in my mind, figuring out to what degree these ancient techniques still apply, or like I think was always already
Hmm.
happening, was that they're constantly undergoing a refining process,
Yeah.
figuring
Yeah.
out,
And you
what
see,
they actually mean.
different astrologers have different rationales for things. And so they have slightly different techniques.
Hmm. Okay, so yeah, now that we've gotten through all the different ways of approaching this, maybe we can get to actually answering the question
Hmm.
for Lily. uh, so I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to pull up Lily's chart real quick. All right, so have Lily's chart here. Actually, is giving me permission to share. And unfortunately, it's defining some of the points in kind of a weird way in this chart. But I believe we both have done the calculations for Lily, right? And
Yeah. Well, I did for the Almuten Figuris.
yeah, and it becomes a little easy for I think in Lily's case because we have a very powerful luminary in the first house in its own sign. We have a Cancer rising with the moon in the first house at 10 degrees in its own sign in Cancer. So it's meets all the conditions for Predominator, I guess, for using that approach.
Hmm.
Because it is the most angular light. The
It's a
sun
night
would
chart.
qualify as well, which is, yeah, because it's a night chart, I think we would be giving the moon more precedence. But it's also
It's
the one
also
that's about
like
to rise next. Yeah.
yeah, it's a little closer to the ascendant, so it's a little more eastern than the sun.
Hmm.
It's kind of a fun case study.
Yeah, it is. And uh, it's almost simple. It makes it simpler to some degree. But the moon would also, in this case, be its own ruler. So the predominator rules itself, then it's also the master of the nativity.
Hmm.
So to a large degree, it's kind of running the owner and stakeholder. They're all sort of the same person, I
The moon
guess.
is very invested in Lily's chart.
Yes. Oh yeah.
The moon cares a lot about how things go for Lily.
Hmm. And it'd be different. I mean, it's interesting to think about like the idea of like the curios as well, like which I'm not going to try to figure out here. But with Venus on the ascendant in Cancer, where it does have triplicity dignity, I think it's in a night chart
Yeah.
especially. Um, though I can't remember who the nighttime ruler is. I don't usually use like I don't usually differentiate between the day and night rulers, particularly when I'm thinking about triplicity.
Um,
I sort of use all three.
Venus, the night triplicity ruler is Mars,
Oh
but
yeah, that's right.
Venus is in her own face because the first decan
Yes.
of Cancer is ruled by Venus. So there's
Yeah.
a little essential dignity going on.
Yeah. And then you get just like the angularity of it. And it meeting a lot of the other conditions to be like captain of the ship in a lot of other ways. You know, there could be an argument to make that Venus might be, since it's literally at the steering wheel on the ascendant, it might be, it might not, be, nobody else may be able to really compete with Venus in that sense because, you know, she's right there. But it's a way of thinking about it, I suppose.
There are a couple of things
Mhm.
about Venus I wanted to point out because Lily specifically asked about Venus since it's like right on the ascendant.
Yeah.
So, um, the book I mentioned earlier, Rulers of the Horoscope by Alan Oken, which I have here.
Hmm.
This is an interesting book.
Yeah, I have that one.
Talks about the final disposer, talks about chains of rulership. Um, it's a modern text, so it uses modern rulerships where like the outer planets co-rule signs.
Hmm.
And it uses the 12-letter alphabet with houses, but in a lot of ways, otherwise it's very traditional. Like it's really about determining the sort of strength or weakness of the
Yeah.
planet's effort.
Hmm.
So his definition of the ruling planet is the one that most of us are most familiar with, the ruler of the ascendant, the planet ruling the ascendant, which in
Yeah.
Lily's case is obviously the moon.
Hmm.
But he does say that if there is a planet conjunct the ascendant very closely, that planet takes over as the ruling planet. So in his system, Venus would be the ruler. And his system, he's using quadrant houses, he's using Placidus.
Hmm.
So his rule is if a planet is conjunct the ascendant, if a planet is in the 12th house and it's conjunct the ascendant within 3 degrees, or if a planet is in the first house and it's conjunct the ascendant within 5 degrees, that planet is the ruler of the chart. And the ruler of the ascendant is still really important in terms of giving direction to the person's life, but he would give primacy to the planet conjunct the ascendant. So in Lily's case, Venus definitely meets that
Yeah.
condition. Of course, he's the only astrologer I know of who uses this particular technique. So,
Uh,
experiment with it. It's not one that I use, but I thought it was interesting just in light of Lily's question
I
that
believe
there is at least one professional astrologer who's written a whole book on rulership who would say yes, Venus is your chart ruler.
Robert Schmidt um, also basically gave precedence to any planet that was closely conjunct the ascendant.
Oh, interesting.
Would
Okay.
basically exclude the ruler if there was a planet very closely conjunct this the ascendant. Like that one just sort of takes over
Yeah.
because it's there. It's on it's at the
It's on
steering
it.
wheel. Yeah, it's you can't really you don't necessarily want to kick the person who's already there driving off, I guess, in
I
theory.
feel like,
I
I
don't
mean,
know.
it's the moon and Venus in Cancer. They're gentle planets in
Yeah.
a gentle nurturing sign. I feel like they're like, let's do it together.
Hmm.
Like it's nice. Like they're not fighting over the steering wheel.
Yeah.
I noticed that when I did the Almuten Figuris calculation, an interesting thing about the Almuten Figuris is it assigns points to each planet. And not only, is the planet with the most points the Almuten Figuris, but you can use it as a hierarchy.
Hmm.
Robert Zoller talks about this in his translation of Ibn Ezra, um, that you can sort of rank the planets from most influential to least influential using this technique. And Venus does get a lot of points.
Hmm.
Um, Venus isn't like I'm using whole sign houses. Whether you use whole sign houses or quadrant houses, the Almuten Figuris is the moon
Yeah.
using this technique. Either way for Lily, the moon
Hmm.
comes out on top. No matter Venus gets a lot of points, and I think if you're using Placidus, because Venus is so close to the ascendant, Venus is in the first house no matter what
Hmm.
house system you're using. Then Venus, especially using Placidus, gets a lot of points using this calculation.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think the second second place for Almuten of the figure would have been Jupiter. Uh, I
That's, yeah,
think,
using whole sign, Jupiter is second for me as well when I did the calculation.
yeah, I actually can't recall. Second.
Which makes, I mean, it fits. It's in the first house using whole signs. It's exalted.
Hmm. Um,
It's very close to the luminary of the sect, and
yeah.
definitely a powerhouse. Lily's chart is interesting because there are a lot of planets that would be contenders for being very influential in this chart.
Oh yeah, for sure. Uh, yeah, Venus rules the day as well. Uh,
Yeah,
but you could say that because Jupiter is under the beams of the sun, that it might be disqualified from
right.
certain forms of uh mastery over the chart.
Right. Yeah,
Though,
Jupiter's like the sun is just moving on. I guess Jupiter will make a heliacal rising not long after Lily was born.
yeah, eventually it's a good where is
It's
it?
it's,
Five
it's on
degrees.
its way.
Yeah.
It's
Though I
on its
mean,
way there.
it would be it would be protected because it's in the sign of its exaltation.
And its chariot.
Yeah. But when you think about it conceptually, it's like one of those like gray areas. It's not it's like well defined, but
Yeah.
it might be protected, like it's not getting burnt up, but like can it really see outside to
Yeah, it's like if you're driving with, your sunglasses on,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
still like you're protected, but it's still a
Yeah, you have
really
your sun
bright
visor
day
up,
and
but
yeah,
it's
not
not
the
ideal.
easiest to navigate
Hmm.
regardless of the protection you've got up.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess the short answer for you, Lily, would probably be that the moon is probably going to be your master, the master of your nativity, the chart ruler for you in most systems.
Yeah.
And maybe there's an argument for Venus playing a dominant role depending on how you're defining it. It's
Yeah.
there's a lot of different ways, and you got to maybe decide what you want to put on your plate, which dishes you want to choose from the buffet. But I think using these techniques, you really end up with the moon as being the Almuten, the Predominator, and the
Master of the
Master of the Nativity.
Nativity
Yeah, it's
and the ruler of the ascendant. You got
mhm.
four, it's the ruler in four different techniques. So
Yeah.
that's pretty. I mean, that's another thing too that if you experiment with applying multiple techniques to your chart, sometimes you'll find interesting patterns where the same planet seems to come up. That happens for me with my chart,
Hmm.
where no matter what I do, Mars is always the answer.
Yeah.
So I think in Lily's case, no matter what you do, except for those cases where there's an argument for Venus being the ruler, it's going to be the moon.
Yeah.
And I think that's like, I know I've heard people, I don't know where I got this idea from. I hear multiple people talk about it, and it's definitely one that I use in my practice, the rule of threes, where if something comes up three or more times in a chart, you really pay attention to it.
Hmm.
Um, and I think if you're playing around with different techniques of rulership and like three or more techniques turn up the same planet, that's probably a planet you should spend some time thinking about. That
Yeah.
planet probably is really invested in your life going well.
Oh yeah. Yeah. But I mean, I guess another part of the question was also the difference between a dominant planet and
Right.
uh a chart ruler,
Right.
which I guess maybe brings us into some of what I really wanted to talk about was like I guess how do we use these different definitions? Like what is I know me and you, Tristan, lately have been talking a lot about the Almuten of the figure and exploring the
Yeah.
different ways that that's been used. And I almost gets hard for me to distinguish because the Almuten of the figure probably takes on a lot of the qualities that both the dominant planet and the ruler of the chart would be trying to get to.
Hmm.
And I guess that's the thing is there isn't necessarily a clear definition of the dominant planet in modern astrology. I mean, they're sort of getting at the same thing. I don't think that
Yeah.
there's a degree to which there isn't a difference, and I guess there's a degree to which defining different roles in terms of mastery, which I guess we already talked about. But yeah, um, let's talk a little bit about the Almuten of the figure, which is kind of I like the Almuten a lot. It's kind of gained, I would say, popularity to a large degree. It's definitely more popular, used a lot more than the Predominator and the Curios and all that, I would say.
Yeah, I wonder about that because I mean I don't see either of them used a lot. Um, but
I'd see
I've
more
I've
references to Almuten, I guess.
yeah,
Yeah, it seems to
I
be.
guess I'm
Granted, I live in my own little
yeah, I
box
know it's
of
like I don't
astrology. I
have
don't
a
know.
good sort of concept of I actually just as a little aside, I'm sorry, I wanted to share this. I thought it was fun. Um, because I tend to be so zoomed in to my own little pockets of the astrology world. Um, and answering a question like this, it helps to have sort of a more zoomed out view of the whole astrology world, and also just like how is astrology understood in popular consciousness. Like, if
Mhm.
you were to stop someone on the street and ask them, do you know what the ruler of a chart is in astrology? If they had an answer, what would it be? Um, so just kind of thinking about the sort of bigger picture, there is an AI chatbot that I'm sure a lot of listeners will be familiar with called Chat GPT.
Oh, I've been wanting to try
Um,
that.
yeah, it's very fun.
Mhm.
There are a lot of interesting implications to this technology that we won't get into here.
Mhm.
But it's trained like it's a bot that is trained using information to be able to give answers. So you can ask it to write you an essay about something. You can ask it to write a hymn.
Mhm.
You can ask it questions about anything, sort of like you're looking stuff up on Google or Wikipedia. It will try to give you answers. And I thought because astrology is kind of a niche thing, I was curious because the information that it's trained on, it's almost certainly come across some information on astrology. But I doubt that it's come across the kind of information you and I have been presenting today. Like I doubt that Chat GPT has been trained on Robert Zoller.
Yeah,
Um,
probably not.
or Ptolemy
Oh,
or
maybe.
any of these maybe. So I was curious if I asked ChatGPT what is the ruler of a birth chart, what it would say. So I just started
Mhm.
with what is the ruler of a birth chart in astrology? And its first answer to me was the planet ruling the sun sign is the ruler of the
I've heard
chart,
that one as well. Yeah, is kind of
which
a popular one.
was yeah, I feel like that's when sun sign astrology became popular in modern times. Uh, people, it became common knowledge what your sun sign is, and then if you wanted to go a little deeper than that, you'd know the planet that rules your sun sign, and that would have been the first planet I would have thought of as a ruling planet. Like when I was a kid, I knew that my sun sign was Aries. I knew that Aries was ruled by Mars,
Mhm.
so I would have been like, oh, it's Mars. And then I asked, okay, let's see if ChatGPT knows something about Hellenistic astrology. So I asked it, how do you determine the ruler of a birth chart in Hellenistic astrology?
Mhm.
And the answer it gave is the planet ruling the ascendant. So that is what the chatbot thinks. And I
Okay.
don't know, like maybe that kind of takes the temperature of like popular consciousness or what is sort of popularly known about
Yeah,
astrology a little bit.
it's sort of the face of I mean, Chat GPT, is that run by, like who's behind it? Like
No,
is it Google or
really smart programmers.
okay.
That's all I know.
I
Yeah,
imagine they're
I don't think it's
yeah.
Google or like a big corporation or anything like that.
Yeah. Wonder if they're pulling from the collective internet, I guess. But
Yeah, I think it's just sort of been trained on a library of information.
yeah. I wonder if you asked it, what the Almuten of the figure is. I mean, I guess it probably just pull a definition of the Almuten of the figure somewhere.
And that this, I also feel like it's probably important to mention that the term Almuten, it's used in a lot of different cases.
Mhm.
as sort of it means like the translation I see used a lot is like you mentioned earlier, Kyle, is victor, sort
Hmm.
of like the winner of the chart. And I think, sometimes like in medieval astrology, the term is used to indicate, the planet that has the most dignity in a chart, for example, is the Almuten. The specific technique that Kyle and I are talking about, the Almuten Figuris, is a very specific technique. It's one we went over with the calculation. So there are different if you just use the word Almuten, it usually just refers to whatever is the most dignified in the context you're talking about. But Almuten Figuris refers to this technique from Ibn Ezra that
Yeah.
then Zoller connects to this idea of the guardian daimon. Um, I have Chris Warnock's definition of the personal or guardian daimon, I think is really good.
Yeah.
He says the personal daimon intermediates between ourselves and higher spirits or spiritual principles. It serves as guide and protector, but also as the spiritual embodiment of the higher principles that make us who we are. So Warnock and Zoller used Ibn Ezra's technique as a way of sort of figuring out the nature of this daimon,
Hmm.
by looking at, what is that planet and what is it sort of, position by sign and house, and can that tell you something about the nature of this being that
Yeah.
intermediates for you with the divine and kind of guides your life.
Yeah. I think that's why I like the Almuten a lot, is as maybe an answer to what it is that people, I think, in general are looking for when they're looking for, what the ruler of the chart is, or even like the dominant
Right.
planet. Like, like which planet do I talk to, or which
Yeah.
one is me? Like which one, or which one do I
Right.
look to for guidance? And to some degree, it's
Yeah.
all of them. But by
Yes.
this sort of perspective, the Almuten is kind of like your Lord and Savior to some degree. And actually, there's an approach
Yeah.
that is from the Neoplatonists would talk about, the Almuten of the figure being not the Almuten of the figure, but the so many big words. The Master of the Nativity being the planet that you would petition if you wanted to like get out of your fate, in a sense. Like
Right.
if you
Right.
didn't if you wanted something other than like what your birth chart promised, you want to talk to you want to bargain with the master of your nativity, or the Almuten of the figure, and
Right.
you want
Right.
to talk to who's in charge.
Exactly. Yeah, like I guess there is sort of a question, when someone asks for the dominant or ruling planet, what is it that they're really asking for?
Mm-hmm.
What is it that they really want to know? And I think in a lot of cases, people are asking, well, which is the planet that's the most like me?
Yeah.
Or they're asking, which is the planet, whose sort of domain is most important for my life.
Mm-hmm.
Um, or like which planet is going to give me like a sense of purpose or a sense of direction or like what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
I think those are all different things that people might be looking for when they're looking for a ruling planet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I like to think about it too as like the planet that's kind of responsible for you to some degree
Mm-hmm.
too.
Yeah, they're your cosmic babysitter.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you're like one of its children, or it
Yeah,
sort of looks at you as well as like a representative. Like,
right,
you are acting to some degree on behalf of this version of me, like of whatever the
right,
planet is doing in your chart.
right.
And that being kind of a guiding force in your life. Um,
Yeah.
Sort of maybe the overall direction. I've been using in my mind a lot of this idea, like the executive producer of your life, as that the Almuten, or the ruler of the chart, uh,
Mm-hmm.
because and there's at some point the metaphor will fall apart, but the executive producer isn't necessarily the one. I mean, that's a kind of a umbrella term. Like the producer could have many levels of involvement. executive producer is kind of the one that's sort of making everything happen to some degree behind the scenes, or like, and could have a lot of involvement or could have just a little bit. But a lot of it is like the name of the executive producer is sort of added to the movie to give it weight in a lot of ways.
Right.
But they also
Yeah.
like will be like, well, I think, you'll have the person who wrote the script, you'll have the director, and like all the actors involved, but the executive producer will sort of come in, and because they're, paying for it or because they're invested in it so heavily, they can kind of have this veto power to a large degree where they're like, I don't really like this. I kind
Right.
of want it to look more like this, So like movies that are executive produced by Tom Hanks all have a lot of like, there's a lot of similar themes in those movies. You can see
Right.
Tom Hanks's signature on all of them. Likewise with other people who are just have their hands in a lot of movies and a lot of pies. And
Yeah.
I guess it's like the way I've been liking to think about it. And you can maybe look to other planets as, if you wanted to use the Predominator and the Master of the Nativity, at different levels, or the Curios, right? Like the Predominator might be
Mhm.
the movie itself, or like the writer of the movie, like the person whose baby it is, kind of to some degree. Like I wrote the script, but then
Yeah.
like everybody else gets their hands involved in it, and what comes out is the movie. It's not always what was written originally. Uh, the Curious might be like a director, person who's like making the movie
Right.
happen.
I like that metaphor too, because I think I sometimes feel a bit hesitant with techniques like this because, on the one hand, in real life, often there does have to be somebody in charge and things have to be delegated in order
Mm-hmm.
for a project to happen at all. Um, but at the same time, um, I also like to try to look at a chart really holistically and go like, the ideal situation is for every factor in this chart to be seen and heard and to exist in proper balance with everything else so that
Yeah.
you're not sort of putting too much emphasis on one thing and ignoring something else. But it's like it's useful to use an analogy like that of, making a film. Everyone who's involved in that film has a really important role to play and they're really significant, but you do have, who's person what person has sort of their name on the final product, and
Yeah.
what people make the final decisions and stuff like that. And I think that can be sort of a useful way of looking at a chart, is that there are no planets that aren't important. There are no planets that are not playing important, pivotal, central roles in your chart. They're all doing something important,
Mm-hmm.
but there might still be somebody who at the end of the day is playing the role of the writer or the director, where
Yeah.
they have a lot of sort of creative control over what the final product is going to look like. And if
Yeah.
you have issues,
Mhm.
that's the person that you want to go to. You don't want to go to, the camera
Right.
person, right? Because like I don't have,
And that is the
authority
executive producer's
to fix
job.
this problem for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the executive producer you want to go to and be like, hey, I have some, if you have issues with the script, you're not going to go to the makeup artist, you're going to go to the writer.
Mm-hmm.
So sort of like knowing who to go to for what issues.
Yeah. Well, and like the executive producer of a movie will be the one that kind of like wants to determine what the goal of the story is to a large degree. Like how do we want people to
Yeah.
feel when the movie is over?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. What is like the point
Yeah.
of this movie?
And that's where I guess when I think about it, and this could be like my Almuten maybe coloring the way I want to see the world. Because I guess when I think about philosophy and just, the idea that we're all sort of looking for a context to build our lives around, you know, a point to the story.
Yeah.
But there isn't one, it's like maybe depending on which lens you're looking at the world through, you're going to have a
Mhm.
different way of seeing what the point is. Um, and I guess I
Yes.
like the idea, and I think it was kind of built into um, the way like early Scandinavian, like I guess Viking age Scandinavian society would have seen it, is that they're kind of putting on a show for the gods in a way, like they're
Right.
performing, that there isn't like the overall goal is to kind of to please to put on the big show, I guess, for the gods. I don't know, like who are you performing for, I guess,
Right.
is maybe how I would think of the Almuten to a large degree. I don't know, like a romantic comedy, like the what do they call it, the punchline, or like there's a word that I don't know, can't think of what the word is, but like every romantic comedy has to have like these ingredients, like, and at the end, of the wedding singer, right? It's um, Drew Barrymore's on the plane, right? She's going to go marry what's his face. I can't remember anymore. But then Adam Sandler shows up and he sings the song for her, and everybody has the moment where it's like kind of funny, but it's also super sweet, and you get emotional, you cry, and everybody was happily ever after. Like that's maybe
That's sort
Venus
of
would
like the
want.
crowning moment of the film. It's like everything in the
Yeah,
film was sort of building up to that, and everything
yeah,
after that point is just kind of like helping you process that sort of peak of the movie. Like the sort of, epilogue is usually like you're wrapping things up, and you're making sure that there's sort of an emotionally satisfactory conclusion to the peak, but everything is really centered on that moment in the
yeah,
story.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, the moment that you're building towards, or like,
Yeah.
mhm. You've been working with the Almuten of your figure, if you will, right? Your Almuten of the figure. How do you like to conceive it the most for your purposes?
So, I mean, that's been sort of an open question for me for a while. Is what does this represent to me? And a lot of the information that I was getting about it didn't really make sense. And so I had to really meditate on what it means for me. Because there are examples, going all the way back to Hellenistic astrology of using the sort of ruling or dominant planet, if you will, of a chart as a way of discussing someone's character. Um, there are examples from Rhetorius of using the master of the Nativity to talk about someone's character. I know that Warnock and Zoller have talked about using the Almuten Figuris as a way of talking about somebody's character or personality. And so, of course, Mars, the interpretation is that, well, if Mars is your Almuten Figuris, then you want to dominate, which is complete opposite of me. So like I don't have a sort of traditionally Marsy personality. But there's also been like I've always been very drawn to both of the malefics, who are both, sitting in the same sign in my chart. So they're kind of a package deal. And so, yeah, I've been doing some sort of exploring of what does that mean? Because I felt just intuitively, I felt this real spiritual resonance. And I was really curious about the sort of spiritual implications of using this technique to find guardian spirits. And the conclusion that I've come to is that I think my Almuten Figuris serves as more of a guide and protector figure.
Mhm.
That I don't necessarily, it's not so much about my personality. It's not like, oh, this is the planet that I'm the most like personality wise.
Mhm.
It's more that like this is the planet that takes care of me. And, sort of looking over my life, I've seen all these examples where Mars has protected me or taken care of me or helped to sort of keep me on the right path. Like whenever I feel like just throwing everything away and giving up on astrology and not being an astrologer, it's always Mars that draws me back in, almost
Mhm.
like that's the planetary uh that's the planet who's kind of like saying there is something here for you. Keep walking down this path. Don't give up on it yet, which I feel kind of fits with the idea of the Almuten figure as being someone who's kind of like they're like the one on the runway with this I don't know what they're called, those big flashing things, so you're helping to guide the plane down into the right spot.
Yeah.
Like they kind of have this perspective on your life that you don't have. And so they're able to say, like, if this is the spot you're trying to get to, or if you're trying to get to a good spot, if you're trying to get to a good landing spot for your plane, this is the one. And
Mhm.
they can show you very clearly where that is. Um, so that's been my personal experience. I
Yeah.
don't have a ton of experience applying this technique to other people's charts, and I'm really curious about doing that. So please, please, please email us or message me on Instagram. I'd be happy to look at it for you and ask you about it because I want more practical experience working with it. Because like I think an open question for me working with this technique is to what extent does the sign and house placement and configuration of the Almuten Figuris play into its meaning? Because, the description of, say, Mars is your Almuten Figuris, or Mars is the master of your nativity, then your life is going to be about conquering and dominating and whatever.
Yeah.
That's sort of like the sort of like pure archetypal, image that we have of Mars. It's the kind of like cookbook description that we get of Mars, just Mars as an isolated archetype and not one of the many faces that Mars might show through the zodiac. Because Mars in Gemini might be Mars as a trickster.
Yeah.
And, Mars in Pisces, might be a romantic hero, like a chivalrous knight or something,
Oh yeah.
like a bard, like a poet who sings or shares stories about great heroic or courageous deeds, but is not necessarily like on the battlefield themselves, right? Like that can be a face of Mars, maybe in Pisces, right? So they're like all these ways that a planet shows different sides of its nature, depending on where it's placed. And that's like the sort of the reconstruction that I've read offered by Warnock and Zoller there are no sort of like delineations of like, well, what does it mean if your particular Almuten Figuris is Venus and Pisces in the third house?
Oh yeah.
Aspecting these planets. Like, how does that change the meaning of it? So yeah, I'd be very curious to actually talk to people about how they see if there have been like times in their life where they have felt like they've been guided or protected in some way. And if the sort of symbolism or the themes of those events lines up with that planet and the house it's in any sort of meaningful way.
Yeah. I mean, I would think that it would have a lot to do with, I don't know, I guess not to go back into the executive producer, but I mean, I guess if you're looking for who the Tom Hanks is in your birth chart, sponsoring your movie, like what's up with Tom Hanks is probably really relevant to the kind of movie that's being produced, right?
Yeah.
Is he going to make another World War II movie, or like what kind of what kind of mood is Tom Hanks in, or
Absolutely.
what's going on in his life? What does he want to see made? I think would have everything to do with it. And just, I mean, thinking about you too, like you have Mars in Capricorn, right? So it's that face of Mars. It's exaltations aren't necessarily the archetypally pure version of the Mars. It's almost the refined version, but I don't know. It's like probably wanting to find a mission, a reason, to fight, I guess. Like not necessarily to fight, but there could be a bit of like a story of struggle, but like overcoming challenges, like rising occasion. And I guess my ideas about Mars are that Mars always wants to etch its name into the sky in some way. Like it wants to immortality through death or something.
Yeah, exactly. Having your name live on in history because of the good death. I'm forgetting the name of the concept in ancient Greece where the thing that really mattered was that you died in a heroic fashion so that your name would live on in history.
Yeah, you want Venus to be crying for you after your death, or to be writing stories about you.
Yeah, you want stories to be told about.
It's all about impressing Venus at the end of the day, I think, for Mars.
At the end of the day, that's Mars's mission. It's to impress Venus as much as possible. What about you? Have you been working with your Almuten Figuris? Have you found any connections between that planet and some of the concepts of like a guardian daimon or a ruler or an executive producer?
Oh yeah. So, using Ibn Ezra's calculation, I actually end up with a split decision between my Almuten, or I get two planets that basically score the same number of points. I get Venus and the Moon, and I've been thinking, I guess, a lot about Venus because I tend to ignore Venus, but then
never ignore Venus
because well. That's the thing, and I wonder to what degree it is because I maybe, and I guess it's where you have to really look at the condition of the Venus, right? If you're looking at Venus as like running your show to some degree, like I have Venus in Gemini, it's in the 12th house. And its only aspect is with Mars. It says a trine with Mars in the eighth. So it's not in the action, or at least not as obviously. There's a 12th house quality to it, but then
Yeah.
it has a Antitia with my ascendant. It has a square with my midheaven. So it's trying to do stuff and it's trying to show up in my life. But it's doing so through being in the 12th, through really only having Mars to directly talk to, and like being pretty peregrine. And so it's but then I think about it, like, I don't know. Like I've always been trying to do creative things, I guess, in my life. And
like this.
Like this, yeah. And I value Venusian qualities, but also like Venus and Gemini qualities to a large degree. Like I like intelligent people.
Yeah.
I get frustrated with myself when I'm not clever or witty enough, or articulate
Right.
enough. The story that Venus is trying to write is one of being smart and cool, but
I like that.
maybe having to do it in or having a hard time because it's in the 12th house.
Although I wonder, I don't know if you like, do you notice sort of the direction of your life seems to head towards 12th house topics and that things seem to work out? Like, I think of, being an astrologer, a lot of the time we're talking to people don't usually come to us because everything is great. People usually come to an astrologer because there's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And they're hoping that astrology might give them some perspective that will help them with that problem. So we hear, when people come to us for readings, we hear a lot of struggles. And we probably hear a lot of really 12th house stuff. And I wonder, because I know like Kelly Surtees has done a couple really good talks on the 8th and the 12th houses, and she really looks at them as being the places where you find people like counselors, social workers, psychotherapists, and readers, who like tarot readers and astrologers who are often someone comes because they're like, I just had a really bad breakup and I just need some help processing it. And what do the stars or what do the cards have to say about this? How can I get some guidance, So I guess my question is like, do you see that as like, do you feel sort of like Venus is pulling you in that direction a little bit of being the person who like takes an honest look at, human suffering and tries to do something about it, especially since it's in Gemini, like being someone who talks about it, who advocates for it, or who like counsels people through conversation or what have you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I mean, and I think a lot of that has come through like dealing with my own mental health challenges,
Yeah.
And learning to relate to people, I guess, through that. I remember being younger, and I probably still have this philosophy, but just sort of realizing that like if you didn't have something wrong or some issue that was troubling you in your life, like if you were just like a happy, well-adjusted person, I wasn't really interested in talking to you. Like it just wasn't like wasn't that interested. And that's probably run my life to a large degree, is that I don't know. Also, like need for isolation has totally been a big thing. Like I always need to retreat back to my own personal isolated space. It's like where I recenter.
Mm-hmm.
Which is not strictly, I don't know, Venus wants to be out and chatting. And I get there. I like it at times. I like to be out and socializing, but I probably need more time to recharge and be alone and recenter recharge my own batteries. The 12th is kind of
if that's
a little antisocial.
Well, I wonder if that's your face of Venus too, because like when you start to look at the planets more three-dimensionally as like people as opposed to just symbols, they're actually like people that can have different moods. Even Venus, who we generally think of as being such a social planet, and that's obviously like that's a big responsibility of hers in the sort of astrological pantheon. But even she needs a break. She's still like a person. She still needs to like and Venus is all about soothing and calming. So like maybe even Venus needs, to take some, you know, when you're at a party and the bathroom becomes your favorite place because it's like, oh, I can just go and like scroll my phone for 5 minutes and
Oh
no one
yeah.
will bother me, and I can
Hmm.
just sort of like recharge my batteries a little bit. Like,
Oh yeah.
Venus in the 12th is like Venus taking a break from the party, is like fixing her makeup, scrolling her phone for a few minutes, just taking a breather, like recharging the batteries.
Yeah.
But even she needs that.
The idea is eventually to go back to the party, but uh,
Yeah.
that's almost to some degree. I know that's like almost where I enjoy. I don't know that like that moment of like reflection can often be like where I actually really enjoy and appreciate things. It's like where I'm when I'm like alone and I'm like, oh wow, that was really fun, or something like it's not
Yeah.
necessarily as easy for me to like feel in the moment as it is for me to
Right.
feel when I'm like still and by myself.
I think a bit of like, because if Venus is all about, maintaining cohesive and harmonious relationships, solitude plays a role in that. Like having it's really healthy in a relationship for partners to have their own lives outside of the relationship to some extent, and to have space where they can be by themselves. It's also healthy to have, some things are private, like some
Mm-hmm.
things are just for you. Like my partner and I spent some time apart recently, and I really like American cheese on cheeseburgers and grilled cheese, like the stuff that comes in the little individual plastic slices. It's really good for melting. My
Yeah.
partner does not understand. It's not about it. My partner really likes curries and like spicy Indian food, and
Uh-huh.
I can't handle it. So we had this time apart, and it's sort of like curry is Keith's thing, American cheese is my thing, and we have like our own, and we when we spend time apart, it's like that's my cheese vacation and Keith's Indian food vacation. So like there are little things where there are like sort of spaces between you and your relationship, and those things actually help maintain the cohesion of your relationship. It's like having your little like I have an office in my house that's just like my space. I get to decorate it myself. Keith doesn't have any, say about what goes on in here. And like Keith has their workshop, and that's entirely their space. I don't, I have no authority over what goes where in that space. And so we have our little spaces. And I think that having those little spaces actually makes us closer. So maybe like Venus in the 12th is also like a comment on the ways in which our solitude actually nourishes our relationships with other people.
Oh, that's yeah. I would say it's been a theme for sure. That finding that balance too,
Yeah.
like needing to be separate, but also together. It's funny
Right,
though,
like
because
being sort of alone together, like I'm reading and you're watching TV and we're just doing our own
yeah.
thing, but we're in the same space.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. It's funny though, because I don't know. You saying you don't like spicy food, can't handle the curry, and like you have the Mars Almuten.
I
I'm
know.
like for real, like, but it could be that Venus's job is also to be trying with Mars, right? So it's learning to love Mars, I guess. And I love spicy food. Really,
Yeah, there
actually,
you go.
almost if it were up to me, would eat almost exclusively spicy food. It's amazing. I put crushed red pepper on like everything. So
Oh, you're one of
I don't
those.
know. Oh yeah, yeah. Though maybe I don't know. You're regulating Mars more or something. I'm not sure.
I've gone through phases with it. I really like hot sauce. I think
Yeah,
curry is the one that doesn't tend to agree with me, but I do like hot sauce. But maybe it's, maybe this is also a case where the sign makes the difference, where Capricorn is a cold sign and Mars isn't at their spiciest in Capricorn, but Venus and
yeah,
Gemini is like, I want to experiment with all kinds of interesting flavors and
yeah,
sensations and like intense and unusual sensations.
yeah, yeah. I mean, there's so many ways that it does end up showing up. Like the more I've thought about it, just even like its
Mm-hmm.
decomposition and everything, and I think that's like one of the fun ways to approach this technique is to spend a lot of time with that planet and like what it's
Yeah.
doing and like seeing how that shows up in your life, like and
Yeah.
how maybe that might be a significant guiding force, and maybe like learning to squeeze the most or the best sort of juice out of that planet
Hmm.
might be a way of approaching life that is will be fruitful. I know I like the idea of like that being. So I think what we're really trying to do with this like ruler of the chart, kind of in like all the techniques, is like which one do I focus on?
Yeah,
And it because it's to focus on all the planets is like
it's hard. It's a
which one's
lot.
gonna be worth it? Like which one's gonna like give me the
Yeah,
things
which
that I
one's gonna
want?
get
Yeah.
which
Uh
one's gonna have the most
yeah.
payoff or the most useful information or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah. Which one's gonna make me rich and famous? Or give me whatever I desire. And maybe I don't know, maybe that's not everybody's goal. Maybe that's what Venus wants. I don't know. It's not exactly what I
Yeah, I
want,
mean
but I don't know.
these techniques are very sort of like goal oriented, and that is also only one way of looking at things and of using astrology.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, I guess it's a good point of reflection on like what your goals are to some degree too. Like if you were
Yeah,
to think about it as like this planet could be saying something about um what I want the end of my story to look like, or what I want, the whole movie to be about, right? Like spending time with what that could
yeah,
mean, and whether it does or doesn't resonate for you, is always something to
yeah,
consider. But um, and then you can look at like what sort of obstacles are is that planet facing, and like how
yeah,
might I constructively work with it? Um, and also like
yeah,
getting more into like ritual work and stuff, like having a target for it is helpful. I've been trying to focus more on Venus as like
yeah,
a planet that like I want to appease and maybe feed a little more, make more offerings to Venus. Uh,
yeah.
but I like
Yes, I mean,
yeah, you should go ahead.
go ahead. Okay.
You go
No,
ahead.
I
No, you go ahead.
using the Almuten Figuris or yeah, out politing each other.
Mhm.
Using the Almuten Figuris or the Master of the Nativity as a way to determine sort of what your guardian spirit might look like. The idea in a lot of magical traditions is also to actually like contact that being,
Mhm.
and open up a dialogue with that being, so to have a direct line of communication. So in terms of how you use this, there are sort of techniques of like getting in touch with your guardian spirit, and they can be a partner in ritual work and magical work and stuff like that. I'm like, I am very curious to hear more about your work with Venus, because I also kind of wonder if it can be a way of like I think all the planets try to help us all as best as they can. Like I think I tend to think of the planet. I mean, this is just my way of thinking about it. There are others, but the way I tend to look at the planets in astrology is that they're sort of intermediaries between us and the divine.
Yeah.
And if you believe in fate, I guess you can see them as intermediaries between us and fate. And they're trying to help us out. They're trying to tell us like, here are the circumstances, and here are ways I can help you. But I do wonder if like, because people do resonate with certain planets more than others, even though all of them are always important. It is true that like there's often like one or two planets that you really kind of fixate on. And I've noticed that in terms of like petitioning, like actually asking a planet for help in a ritual or devotional context,
Yeah.
that like the malefics have been very helpful to me and very immediately. Like I will go to Saturn or Mars for help with something, and the help is like that.
Mhm.
Um, and I don't know, like I need to, I'm still only like a couple years into kind of experimenting with devotional work and stuff. I need to do a lot more to reach any kind of conclusions.
Mhm.
And then of course with anything, as soon as I've reached a conclusion, I'll learn something new, and then I'll have to rethink everything. But like, I haven't done enough to sort of conclude that like, okay, they're my sort of main planets that I can petition and they will be the most helpful to me. But I wonder if that's a case for a lot of people, where like all the planets might try to help, but there's going to be one or two who are like really especially aligned with you in a way that if you petition them, they're probably the ones that are going to be the most able to help. I
Yeah.
wonder if you, as you continue doing devotional and ritual work, if you'll find that, if you'll find it with Venus, that like when you petition different planets, that Venus in particular seems to be the one who's like has the easiest time sort of answering your petitions or helping you out or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, it's something that I'm also pretty relatively new to in terms of like the devotional work. But I guess I think
Yeah.
about like times in my life when I've like fed Venus properly, like in a balanced way, like those
Hmm.
are times of my life that tend to go better, I guess.
Yeah.
One way I think about it. Um, yeah, I don't know about that. Maybe you and I will chat about that more. I did
Yeah.
want to real quick because we got to wrap it up here soon. I wanted to share one example chart really briefly.
Let's see it.
Do, 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 do. It's the chart of a figure I'm, pretty familiar with. I've spent a lot of time with the chart. But this is a chart of Kurt Vonnegut, who, well-known author, writer of books such as what Slaughterhouse-Five is probably the most popular. Um, and when you do the calculation for Kurt Vonnegut's Almuten, you get Jupiter as the Almuten of the figure, right? And so Jupiter in Kurt Vonnegut's chart is in the third whole sign house in Scorpio, and it is conjunct Mercury in Scorpio.
Very close.
Yeah, and they're both actually together making a helical rising. They're both just coming out from under the beams of the sun. They're right on.
Very
They're
cool.
they're making phasis. They're doing the phasis thing. They're saying,
Very
"What's up,
cool.
world?"
We're back.
Yeah, and I find that really interesting because it shows up in Kurt Vonnegut's life really well. So, well, one, you get maybe like the Caden element being in the third house is that, it's Jupiter conjunct Mercury in the third, like it, might be trying to be a writer, perhaps a dark humorist of some
Mm.
kind.
Ooh, Scorpio.
Somebody who is sort of irreverent and makes very like his books are very like they're funny in like a super dark way, and they're very anti-war centric, but like sort of pointing out being funny by like pointing out like all the awful things about humanity. It's good times. It's the kind of party that I like to show up to, but
Yeah, this is definitely a Kyle example chart.
yeah. But the cadency, like it took him a while to get there. Like he wasn't really a well-known author until I think well into his 40s. Like Slaughterhouse-Five, I believe, was late 40s possibly when that picked up. Maybe even early 50s. I'm not sure exactly, but he also like if you look at like the ruler, it's square Mars in Aquarius, which is in like the sixth house. Uh, I don't want to go into a deep dive into his chart, but like it plays into the rest of the chart, and he had to, he was in World War II, survived the bombing of Dresden, was taken prisoner. He was a prisoner of war during World War II. But like weird sort of luck, like through kind of a dark scorpionic scenario, and that was kind of like a theme in his life. Like had to deal with the shit, but like survived it.
Hmm.
And lived to like tell jokes about it, and or to but also to like make meaning around it to a large degree, or to explore those topics in like a deeper way. But he was like a avid smoker, like smoked like 3 or 4 packs a day,
Wow.
drinker, not a healthy man by any stretch, lived into his late 80s, and he didn't die from a health issue. He actually died from hitting his head. I fell. I can't remember exactly. He slipped on the stairs or something. Died of like a head injury, like 7 days
Oh,
after he
wow.
fell. But like in his late 80s. So I don't know. There could be like an element of luck there that Jupiter could be providing, because the chart as a whole, there's some gnarly stuff happening. But kept him going for a long time. But
Yeah.
I thought that was a fun just example of like an Almuten maybe in action, uh, without going too deep into it. Uh, and I wanted to share real quick. It's a quote from, well, it's Zoller translating the Picatrix, but quoting the Picatrix. You've probably read this one, Tristan.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, just thought it's a good like overview of what the Almuten of the Figuris might do, or just different versions of it. But quote, if the Almuten Figuris, how do you pronounce it?
I don't know. I've never heard anyone say it.
I
I
like to
say
say Almuten of the figure
Figuris.
because I will say Figuris or Figuris, or it just,
Figuris.
yeah. Uh, the Mount, the Almuten, if the Almuten is the sun, the native will want to lead, express his creative power, and be recognized. If the moon, he will want to care for, be cared for, eat, and make love, dream, etc. If it is Mercury, they will be diligent in the sciences, business, and communications. If it is Venus, they will be a lover of beauty, of music, of men and women, etc. If it is Mars, they will fight in order to dominate. I know it's overly simplistic for that one, but if it is,
That's me, all right.
yeah, if it is Jupiter, they will philosophize and teach. If it is Saturn, I like this one. They will retire from
That's my
society,
favorite.
investigate hidden things, and suffer adversity. Which I'm like, am I sure it's not Saturn?
That was
Seems a little more
if you use
on point.
Placidus for mine, it's Saturn. And I definitely feel of all those descriptions, is the moon and Saturn are the ones I definitely identify with.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess I mean I Venus resonates with me on. I guess in terms of what I'm actually like trying to do, maybe not what I always
Yeah.
end up doing. Um, but you know, my successes and failures in the Venusian arena are probably uh if I, after I die and I get to watch the movie, I'll probably be like, "Oh yeah, that was the theme." I don't know, or something
The theme
around
was
that.
Venus and Gemini. Yeah.
Yeah, so really bad romantic comedy maybe. Or just, I don't know. Really dark romantic comedy.
That sounds great to me. I
Yeah,
would
actually,
watch that
I like
movie.
actually that idea. I don't know if I can think of a movie that fits that bill, but I kind of want to make it now.
There was
Army of
one last
Darkness was
little,
my favorite movie as a kid, which actually might
yeah, Army of
fit all
Darkness.
fit all the fit the bill actually pretty well. But
I
anyway, go
mean,
ahead.
even like just using all the movie analogies, I feel like that's actually pretty Venusian. It's entertainment, it's art, it's
Hmm.
culture. Movies are pretty Venusian.
Oh yeah.
Um, I there was another little thing I uncovered when I was poking around in Robert Zoller's work on the Almuten Figurates, and he found something in the Picatrix, um, which he interprets as using the Almuten Figuris to know which of the three spirits a person is ruled by.
Hmm.
So the three spirits
Oh
are
yeah.
natural, animal, or rational. The natural spirit wants to satisfy appetites, the animal
Hmm.
spirit wants to dominate, and the rational spirit wants to contemplate eternal truths.
Hmm.
So if your Almuten Figuris is the moon or Venus, then you're supposed to be dominated by the
Sad.
natural
Yeah, I
spirit.
want to
You want
satisfy
to
appetites. Yeah, of
satisfy appetites.
course.
If it's the sun or Mars, then you're ruled by the animal spirit, where you want to dominate others.
Hmm.
And if it's Mercury or Jupiter, it is the rational spirit, which is the contemplation of eternal truths. I don't know how much stock I put in it, but I thought it was really interesting. And then Zoller goes on to point out that this passage doesn't mention Saturn at all. And so Zoller's theory is that Saturn is referring to studying texts like the Picatrix, where you're
Yeah.
doing like some sort of occult, illicit, magical activity.
Hmm.
That's the sort of spirit that Saturn lends to their children.
Yeah, That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. But I thought that was interesting. Interesting food for thought.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. And I guess at the end of the day, it's like, you're going to end up layering it into everything else in your chart. And I don't
Yeah.
know, and finding a way that fits for you. And I don't know. You're kind of knightly, Tristan. You are sort of a knight. I think of you in very knightly terms. So
Thank you.
I think you
I'm
may
a
not be trying to
paladin.
dominate the world, but you're, I don't know, looking to defend it in some way, perhaps. Looking
Yeah.
for a mission to accomplish. I don't know.
Yeah, I think I'm a pretty like goal and purpose driven person.
Yeah.
Um, and I mean my name, it's self-chosen. I mean, it's kind of
Mm.
self-chosen. There's a weird story with my name. When I was transitioning,
Mhm.
I knew I needed to pick a name, and I really didn't have anything in mind. And I'm obsessed with Arthurian romances, and I
Oh
was
yeah.
reading Tristan and Isolde at the time, and it was
Mm.
just the name Tristan just jumped off the page. I wasn't thinking about names for myself or anything. It was just like the book like took me and shook me by the collar and said, "This is your name."
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, who am I to, defy the will of the Arthurian writers? Um, and so I picked that name. And then when I told my mom, she was like, hold up and let me get the baby name book that I had when I was choosing names for you. Because if you had been assigned male, Tristan was one of the top names in my list. And sure enough, it was written in the back of the
Oh
book of
wow.
baby names that she was consulting when she was pregnant.
Interesting.
So I do have the name of
Huh.
a knight.
And I would have been Robin, apparently.
Oh, that's a good one.
No.
I mean, Robin, you don't like Robin? I think that's a cute name.
Uh I like it in the sense that I once knew a Robin. I worked with a Robin, and I I nicknamed her Throbbin' Robin because she was a roller derby person, and I decided that
Okay.
Throbbin' Robin should be her roller derby name because it just sounds like, I don't know,
Just
like
bruising.
throb, like, or just like, I don't know, it's just throbbing with intensity. It's very
I love
suggestive,
that.
and it's a good time. I don't know. It's uh provocative, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, I do have to wrap it up. Do you have anything going on that you want to share with the world, Tristan?
I will, or I guess you will include a link to my Instagram in the show notes. It's just my
Yeah.
name. It's Tristan J. Paylor. Um,
Are you doing readings
so
again?
yeah, I am not yet. I'm going to start doing readings again in the summer, I believe. I'm finishing up a course in narrative astrology right now. I've been trying to sort of figure out what my approach is going to be before I start doing readings again. So once I'm finished up that course in like the middle of summer, I will probably start again. But in the meantime, feel free to follow me on Instagram and send me messages, especially about chart rulers. If you're working with the Master of the Nativity or with the Almuten Figuris, or if you want somebody to calculate those placements for you and talk to you about them, my inbox is open.
Yeah. Yeah, do it. Tristan
And
is responsive and super fun to talk to. So do
oh,
it.
thank you. And yeah, and keep an eye out, I guess, if you want to follow me on Instagram for when I open up my books again in the summer.
Awesome. Well, yeah. It's for me, the usual, you can book a reading with me at kylepierceastrologer.com. Yeah, that's all you need to know for right now. Join Tristan and I for well, it's we're one of us should be there most of the time. But for our tri-weekly, would you call it? 3 times or three times a
Thrice
month,
monthly.
thrice
Yeah.
monthly Deccan chats. You can find a link to the Discord server, the Three of Wands Discord server, which will give you all the information you need to participate. But you want to learn about the Decans, which are pretty cool, uh, do it. Join us. But yeah, with that, let's call it a day. Thank you so much for joining me, Tristan. This was a blast.
Thank you for having me. This was so much fun.
Yeah, anytime. Yeah, and thank you everyone for listening. think that's all I got. I probably meant to say other things, but yeah.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Lily, for sending in this fantastic
Yes.
question.
Thank you,
We were
Lily,
able to
for and thank you for being our excuse to talk about Almutens and Predominators. Yeah. Well, bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. And if you have a question you'd like to hear answered on Astrology Hotline, shoot us an email at astrologyhotlinepod@gmail.com.